And good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Ralph Williams One on One. My special guest by phone today is Joe DESTIO, and Joe and I are going to talk about his career and what he's currently doing, and so on and so forth. This show today, as all the shows are going to be in the next week or so, are going to be dedicated to the late Franco Harris. So. I also want to invite you to join me tonight at 7:30 for Talking Wrestling with myself and Smoking Jim Frazier. I got to tell you, this is going to be an awesome show, being that it's the last show of 2022. We have a lot to talk about, a lot of things going on in the wrestling world that we're going to talk later on this evening at 7:30. And but right now, coming up in a couple seconds here, we're going to talk with Joe DESTIO. So Joe is standing by. We'll be with you in just 1 second. All right, Joe DESTIO, it's great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on Ralph Williams One-on-One. How's everything with you today?
Hey, Ralph, good to talk to you again. Happy to be here, and happy Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Same to you, Joe. Joe, I want to ask you a question here. Have you ever had any interaction with Franco Harris?
Yeah, I covered sports for about 10 years, but when I met Franco, it was usually when I was a newsman.
Oh, okay.
Because, as you know, he was so involved in a lot of nonprofit organizations and activities. He was a longtime spokesman for the Dollar Energy Fund, and that helped to raise money for people to keep their heat on during the winter.
Right.
Franco was a big part of that. The Pittsburgh Promise,
yes,
to raise money for city high school kids to go to college. And Franco was for a long time kind of the face of the Pittsburgh Promise, or at least one of the faces, and he was involved in that. So they would hold news conferences and events, and I would see him, once or twice a year. And when he was talking news, it was the same as when he was talking sports. He had plenty of time for you. He was always gentle, soft-spoken, as we came to know him. But he had specific things he wanted, and he cared. I mean, that was that was the reason he was involved in these things. He was just so caring and cared a lot about people who weren't as well off. And, it was a pleasure to interact with him in that way.
Oh, absolutely. I had some interaction with him when I went to El Vento's senior's funeral and his wife's funeral, Rita Vento. I don't know if you noticed or not, I'm friends with the Vento family. So
Franco's Army.
Huh?
Franco's Army.
Yes, Franco's Italian Army. Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm working on getting El Vento Jr. on to talk about that on Ralph Williams One-on-One coming up soon. So I have to talk with him, but I'm working on getting him on here as well to talk about Franco's Italian Army and his interaction with Franco Harris.
Right.
Joe, tell the audience what you've done in the past and what you're currently doing now.
Well, I did basically 40 plus years of radio. And,
right.
Ralph, it was something when I was a student at Pitt, I was always interested in radio, even, in middle school and high school, listening to music and, the old KQV and
right.
Wixie and
I'm Steve Lowe.
Yeah, all those stations. And so I had an interest in it. And of course I was a sports fan. So I grew up listening to Bob Brents and Jack Fleming and even Bill Hillgrove back then was doing Pitt basketball to start, if I recall.
Right, right.
And so I was interested in radio. I got involved at Pitt on the campus radio station, and it just grew from there. I got internships, I got jobs, and worked at KQV and when it was all news. And we moved away. I worked down at WRC in Washington, D.C., and then came back to Pittsburgh when WTAE started a news talk station. And then the owners of WTAE sold it. And about a year later, it was purchased by ESPN. And so that would have been around 2000. And I got involved in doing sports. So I covered sports for 10 years. And that was a great experience. Always a sports fan, but had never really done it professionally. And then ESPN sold the station in Pittsburgh. We were all out of work.
Wow.
And that was 2010.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I did real estate actually for about a year and a half.
How was that?
But I wanted to get back into radio, and then KDKA had an opening, and I signed on there. This was back again doing news work, and I retired about 2 years ago. 60. I think I was 67 at the time.
Wow.
And so since then, I've been doing. I got involved with Pitt doing public address for their games back when I was on ESPN, and I still do that. I mean, it's a lot of fun. It keeps me involved with a lot of the guys who are covering the games, with some of the players, and it's a great thing to be able to do because it doesn't take a whole lot of study ahead of time. A little bit, but not much. And so I do that. I've been getting into trying to narrate audiobooks.
Oh, okay.
And I do a little bit of that. I've done one book so far. Those are major undertakings. And
Right.
I do some volunteer work with 412 Food Rescue.
Oh, really? Wow.
I play the sax. I play a lot more golf than I did before. So it's all good.
That's great. 412 Food Rescue, they come to my building here every now and again and drop off some food. It's a great thing to be involved in with Giselle Fetterman. I understand John Fetterman's wife is involved in that. That's a great charity and a great thing to be involved in, 412 Food Rescue. They're great people, and, they do that. Joe, right now you work as Pitt's PA announcer. You work at Acrisure Stadium. You work at the PITT. How's that coming along?
Well, the last couple of years, it's been good. I mean, obviously for football, things are on the upswing. The Kenny Pickett year was the best year, at least performance-wise, for the team that I experienced in the 20 plus years I've been doing it. And I've been going to Pitt games. My dad was an alum and got me going back in elementary school. And he had season tickets, and we went out to Pitt Stadium, and I saw a ton of games back then. And then, of course, we enjoyed the 70s,
right?
And the tremendous ride with Dorsett,
right?
And Johnny Majors, and Jackie Sherrill. And then, in the 80s, especially toward the middle of the 80s into the 90s, things went downhill again, and we really had about 30 to 40 years of, I have to say, it's somewhat mediocre football.
Yeah, it has been, and I've made numerous sayings that I think that Pitt is in the Jackie Sherrill curse, because right after Jackie Sherrill left, this team hasn't been prominent for a national championship since. And I watched the Sugar Bowl game that we almost could have won the national championship. Somebody had to lose, and they didn't. We would have won that year. That was in 1981, I believe. The year we went to the Sugar Bowl against South Carolina and George Rogers. Right. And, I watched that game. I was a big Pitt fan. My grandfather and I used to walk up Cardiac Hill and go to the games. And, I saw Dan Marino play. I watched the Penn State game where they blew out Pitt, and so on and so forth. But right after
48-14.
Yes. Right after he left, Jackie Sherrill, I think that's when Pitt's football program went down the toilet. Now, it did come back a little bit, I think, with Dave Wannstedt. I really like Dave Wannstedt. He was a spokesman for the university. He was a good salesman. He also was a good recruiter. It was sad to see him get fired by Steve Peterson in his second term, as athletic director. I think you'd agree with me on that.
I was sorry to see him go, but I think even Dave would have admitted he would have liked to have seen a little more success. I think he had one 10-win season.
Yes.
But it just got harder. Pitt is not the size school as a lot of these state institutions, the Alabamas, the
even Penn State.
Well, even Penn State,
right.
And of course, even Penn State has run on some hard times over the last 20 years, not like they used to be.
Right.
But the thing is, it was just so enjoyable last year, and I say that even calling a game in which Pitt lost to Eastern Michigan.
Yeah.
So if you can
Western
have a
Michigan,
year,
you mean? Yeah.
If you can have a good year, even losing to Eastern Michigan, I mean, that's, ironically, that's what it was. They ended up having a tremendous year. They win the ACC. Everybody knew what Kenny Pickett was. And so they try to keep it going this year. I think they still have a good shot to remain dominant in the ACC, because, to be honest, there are not a lot of great football powers in the ACC.
No,
There's Clemson.
no, not at all.
And other than that, Pitt's going to have a good chance to always compete. And of course, they've beaten Clemson.
Yes.
So now basketball is a bit of a different story, and again for a lot of reasons, but a lot of it had to do with the move to the ACC. Pitt is not in the ACC traditional footprint,
Right.
and it got tough. And even Jamie Dixon, I think, realized that maybe that was part of the reason he left. It wasn't going to be as easy to recruit the New York kids,
Right.
and the kids that they had relied on to a great extent, the New Jersey players. Now they've gotten some, but it's, once you lose the edge, as we saw in football, it is hard to get it back. This year, fortunately, they seem, with the crazy world of college sports and the way with players, transferring, entering the portal seemingly every year, there have been more players available. And so Jeff Capel has been able to go out and get some players who may be only here 1 year, others who are young and will be here hopefully. And they're 2-0 in the ACC right now. They're in first place. We got to get the fans back, but if they win, if they show that they can win, the fans will come back. Because when I started in 2021, I guess it was, or 2022. I'm sorry, 2001.
Right.
2000 and 2002. The place was packed.
Right.
And it was the most exciting game.
You couldn't get a ticket, and there were people lined up for them. You couldn't get a ticket to a basketball game then.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was a big thing, the brand new facility, and Pitt was on a roll. They've been to the eight, whatever they call that, the Elite Eight. Yeah, they've been there. And then, even when they were in the NIT, they were still, or whatever, they still drew fans there. It was a great time until Kevin Stallings came in, and then, when he came in, and then as soon as he got there, that's when the basketball program kind of went down the toilet a little bit, or a lot actually. And then now we have Jeff Capel, and we'll see what he does this year. He hasn't done anything the last 4 years. I'm interested to see that. You do the girls' basketball team as well?
Not regularly, no.
Okay.
In fact, I haven't done a game this year yet. I'll usually do 1 or 2 or 3 games a year just as a sub. That's not my full time. The full time is Pitt men,
right,
and football.
Right. Let me ask you this: what was in all your 40 years in broadcasting? Which job do you think was the best job, or is the best job?
You mean between news and sports?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Or
yes.
Well, oh man, it's hard to pick. I have to say,
I asked you a tough question.
Well, sports was the most fun.
Right.
I wouldn't have got into the locker rooms and and to see all the games that I saw, and to meet some of the great players, hockey included. And we had a Stanley Cup championship in there. We had a Super Bowl championship, and we had at least 3 years that the Pirates were at least competitive.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
So those were all, the Johnny Cueto game at PNC Park. I'll never forget that. The fans were such a huge part of it, and so I got to see all those games and be a part of it. In a sense, it's also a little easier. I hesitate to say that because it's not easy in any sense, but believe me, at least I always knew what the agenda was. When the Steelers are going to practice, when the game is going to be. Sometimes it's harder to get information out of players,
right?
Because they're not like politicians. Politicians kind of needed us as journalists.
Exactly. Yeah, they needed you to spew their gossip, or to spew their gospel.
Absolutely. I mean, and so
yes, indeed.
But a lot of players didn't need that. You talk to James Harrison. He didn't need me around. He didn't need anybody around.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So from that perspective, it was harder. But on the other hand, there were some really important stories over that time that I thought we covered. You go back to the Johnny Gamage murdered
Right.
in Brentwood, you know, and the what happened around all of that. The Penn State,
Yes.
you know, sex abuse
Right.
and the
Right.
trial, covering that trial for like 2 weeks and then another week for
That was
sentencing.
a great story to cover. I can bet. You know.
Yeah, it was unforgettable. I
Right.
mean, it was
Yeah.
so emotional
Hmm.
seeing these young men up on the witness stand describing, you know, what had happened to them. I will never forget it. And seeing some of the great political leaders, I started with Dick Caligiuri, the
Wow.
mayor here,
Yeah.
and then Sophie, and what a surprise she was, you know,
Oh, yes.
representing Pittsburgh.
Absolutely.
And then, you know, and one after the other. You know, so a lot of political leaders, the death of John Hines, that kind of tragedy. You know, every year there was something. So it is hard to pick. I do think sports was more fun,
Hmm.
and it just opened up opportunities for me that I probably wouldn't have had.
So you're you narrate those ebooks. How's that working out?
It's tough. I'll tell you why.
Why
Uh,
is that?
well, because during the pandemic,
Hmm.
a lot of actors got thrown out of work.
Whoa.
And so
Yeah.
uh, unemployed actors got into doing audiobooks, and it made the competition that much harder.
Wow.
So there were literally thousands of people across the country who were
Hmm.
trying to do this work, often from home. I mean, it doesn't take a
Oh,
big budget to set up a home studio.
no, it
And,
doesn't. No.
you know, and so there's a lot of competition. I haven't auditioned too much recently, but I think I'll get back to it in the new year because it's kind of fascinating. I mean, a lot of these authors, many of the books are interesting. Some of them aren't so interesting, but many of them are. And so you can characters. It's not just narration. You're actually playing characters. The hard part is if you're doing a book like a piece of
Hmm.
fiction, there may be 12 or 15 different characters in that book,
Right.
and you've got to, you know, differentiate them and make them sound different and get into their head a little bit. And that's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. You're watching Ralph Williams One on One. I am Ralph Williams. This show is on a rotating basis here on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. Look at the bottom of the screen on the ticker take, and we are on 4 different platforms. My guest is Joe DeStio, PA announcer for Pitt football, basketball. He also does some ebooks, and he has been a reporter for KDKA and for WTA Radio, ESPN Radio 1250. I remember listening to you, Joe, on the radio all the time. In fact, I've done an imitation of you many times. Hello, Joe DeStio.
Let me ask you, Ralph, because I want to know a little bit. How did you get involved in doing this? What got you interested in broadcasting, and how did you get involved in it?
Okay, I'll tell you how I got involved, Joe. I was on my way to school one day, and high school. I used to go to South over on the south side of the Pittsburgh public school system, and
Sure.
I was on my way to school, and I took trades. I took auto body, small engine repair, auto mechanics. And one day out of clear blue sky, I heard Scott Paulson on WDV. He took over for Jimmy and Steve. And
Yeah.
everybody was mad because Jimmy and Steve left and Scott Paulson was there, and nobody knew what to expect. Well, I thought he was pretty funny. And I said, you know something? I says, I like to laugh and giggle and joke around and do these kinds of things. Why not, why can't I do it? And I have a really good voice. Why can't I do it? So I didn't really have the money to go to Pitt or Point Park or any of those places. So what I did was I went to Columbia School of Broadcasting, and it's a home study school. And then they have a local school, and they where a studio is and everything. I was on the school's radio station. In fact, it was up in Dormont. Do you know where the Dormont Village Shopping Center is there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it was up on the second floor, and I went there for my studio work, and I was on the school's radio station twice a week, and it was great. We would broadcast right in the mall, but people could hear me out on the street, And what had happened was a lot of people got into my show and everything else. And you know, like I had done some skits, you know, like Attorney Edgar Snyder. I did Attorney Edwin Spider, and then I did some other skits, you know, and yeah, oh yeah, and then you know, The Young and the Restless. I came on and I had a guy I was working with. I forget his name, but he and I were partners, and you know, in the show. And I did The Rich and the Tasteless instead of The Young and the Restless. And I came on, you know, I did some funny skits and things like that. And then I got started in my radio career at WPLW 1590 AM, the old Zoom. And at the time it was owned by Bob Hickling Broadcasting. He's up with the Lord now. And in fact, I was supposed to go to his funeral, and I was driving a cab at the time, and I was at the airport. And it's Sunday night, and his funeral was from 7 to 9. It was going on about 7 o'clock. And usually, Joe, on Sunday nights, when I go to the airport, I get nothing. I get like a short trip or something going to Green Tree or Carnegie or whatever. And I said, or even downtown, I could shoot out to Carnegie to the funeral. I had my dress clothes, everything in the trunk of my cab and everything. I was ready to go. And would you know it, I got a trip to Seton Hill University. The shuttle didn't show up at the airport. I had four women in my cab, and so I missed a funeral. And to this day, I still feel bad about it, because Bob Hickling was the person who gave me my first radio job, and I wanted to pay my respects to the man who gave me my first job. Then I worked a second radio job. I was working at both stations. I worked at WKPA out in New Kensington. They were the affiliate owned by WYDD and Energy 105 and all that stuff. I worked there. I worked on weekends. I had a rock show, and I played like classic rock from 7 to midnight on Saturdays. And then Sunday night, after I would leave WPLW Sunday morning into the afternoon, or afternoon into 5 o'clock, I would leave and go out to KPA. And then I worked 7 to midnight at KPA. And I was doing both jobs. It was great. And then WKPA offered me a full-time position, and I went part-time at WPLW. I was the morning man there. I started at 5 a.m., and then I would work till 10. And then I would go out to WKPA for a noon to 6 shift. Well, the first day I got there to start my noon to 6 shift, there's a security guard with a clipboard in his hand standing there. And we've never had a security guard. We got buzzed in, and but we never had a security guard. And he said, what's your name? I said, Ralph Williams, I'm here to start my shift. He said, no, you're not. The station's been bought out. Your job is terminated. So,
oh man,
yeah. And then after that, I got discouraged. I lost interest. I went to go work at a steel mill, and I got back into broadcasting in 1992. I did a TV show on PCTV called Sports Talk with Ralph Williams. My friend in LA, Greg Himmelstein, he was the one that helped me get into that. And he's in California right now, Joe. And listen to this. He has his own singing school, and some of his students have been on those Let's Got Talent and some of them shows, and they were in the top 3. So, you know, and he helped me out for a little while. Then I quit again in 2000. I got discouraged. I got tired of talking about the Steelers all the time. I was doing a show about the Riverhounds when they first got started. And some guy called me up and he said, what do you think Hines Ward's going to do this year? And I said, I think he's going to kick the ball in the net. That's what I think. And, you know, I got real angry, and I said, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired of talking about the Steelers. I want to talk about a lot of other things that nobody does. So and then I came back, you know, you were on The Way I See It show last year. And I came back in October of last year on PCTV. And then I decided to put a studio together here and do podcasting. You know, it's my way of getting back into it. I've had the urge for years to get back into this, and now I'm back in and doing this. And, you know, I have a national wrestling show on Blog Talk Radio every Thursday night at 8 o'clock. We're not doing it this week due to the holiday. And then I do I'm on in Tampa, Florida every Wednesday night at 10:30 with a guy named Peter Blake, and we talk about wrestling for a half an hour or an hour down there in Tampa. So I'm on national shows. I've been on national podcasts, you know, so that's what I've been doing in broadcasting, Joe.
Well, it's great that, you know, that's the thing. It's the same with the audiobooks. The technology now is to the point that it allows us to do more from home.
Right, exactly.
Or you don't have to be in a studio necessarily to get it all done. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a great help. Hey, I got to tell you, Ralph, we share two things in our careers. One, I also worked at WKPA.
Oh, get out of here. Wow.
Yeah, back in the late 70s.
Whoa.
With when a guy named Bob Tattern
Mm-hmm.
brought me in. Bob did everything there. He did high school play-by-play, did news in the morning. He was sales and a great mentor. But I was out there either part-time, first as an intern, and then for a year and a half out in New Kensington. And then the other thing that we share is I also drove a cab.
Hey, I drove a cab for 15 years, and believe it or not, I was the Penguins' personal cab driver at one point. I took her.
Are you kidding me?
I took her Brooks to the airport.
Well, you had more luck with it than I did. I drove a cab, and I just brought that up because it wasn't yellow; it was the old People's Cab.
Oh yeah, I remember People's Cab. Yeah, yeah.
And I
Colonial.
I did it for like about 2 weeks before I got frustrated and quit. but I did drive a cab, had a license, and I thought I'd enjoy it. I didn't like it all that much, but two things that we share.
Absolutely. I spent 15 years driving a cab. I've had a ton of celebrities, a ton of athletes in my cab. And I just, the list goes on, and I could probably write a book about it. You know what I mean?
You do get to meet people.
Yes, I did. I'll tell you who I did meet that was really interesting. I had the Star Trek crew in my cab. They got laid over at the airport because of bad weather. They were on their way to Charleston, West Virginia, U.S. Air. Back in them days, you remember the puddle jumper planes, okay?
For sure.
And U.S. Air had a puddle jumper plane, and there was bad weather in Charleston. They couldn't get the plane off the ground, or they canceled the flight. So I call them useless air. Useless Air had to put them up at a hotel, and I went to the hotel and picked them up. I had George Takei. I had the black woman, I can't remember her name, and the other one that played Schlefkoff in a promoter. I had four of them in the cab. We're on our way out, and George Takei says, Joe, he goes, what do you think of telling somebody you live in the moon? He was making fun of Moon Township. He says, I'd like to tell somebody you live in the moon.
Yeah, tell them we're going through Moon Township.
Moon Township, yes.
Take you to Mars.
Yes, I've had wrestlers in my cab. I worked as a bellman at the Marriott at the airport, and I took Rey Mysterio and Dave Bautista's luggage up. They're wrestlers. They were in town for matches and a show down at the arena. And, I've had The Undertaker and his manager. I took them. They hit a deer. They were on their way in with their car. They hit a deer on Business 60, and they had to walk to the airport Marriott. And they called a cab from there. I went there and picked them up and took them down to the arena for matches and all that.
Wow,
yeah, I've met a lot of interesting people, Joe. It was a rewarding job. I had to give it up because it got real bad after, especially around between, I'd say 2005 and 2006. And then I went to go work for Port Authority, and I worked there for a little while until my first wife passed away. And then I moved on to other things. So,
Well, the list of employment you've had, I think, would rival most people. So you've done it all.
I was in customer service, Joe, for 35 years. Between everything I've done, I've been in customer service. So
right,
it's been an interesting ride, and now I'm doing this. I'm partial. I'm disabled. I'm in a wheelchair, and so I don't really. I get out when I can, and I like doing this, and I can do it right here from my house. That's the interesting thing, or my apartment here, and that's why I like it. And I'm back in everything else. So But anyway,
keep it up.
I am. I'm going to keep it up because this program and all my shows are getting better and better and better. And I'm going later on this month. I'm going on a new channel that's coming up. We're going to be launching a new channel. It's a business sports channel where there's business, medical. We're going to have a medical show, and I'm going to do some sports and some other stuff on there. And we have other people. My friend Claudia Rosano is going to do a show talking about business. So, it's going to be a mix of things. We're going to be launching it probably in the middle of January. So
Good. We'll look for it.
oh, absolutely. I'll send it to you. You know that I always send you my shows. So, you know, we have a comment here from William, who's a steady watcher of the show. It says, I read somewhere that taxi drivers are obligated to buy some sort of taxi medal in order to drive. Is that true, or is that just in New York and something? William, it is in New York. They do require that. Down in Vegas, they have a cab police. You're always on commission down there. Here in Pittsburgh, it's an independent contractor thing. You got to pay a lease and gas. So,
right,
you know,
right.
and the same thing in Atlantic City and a few other places. You got to do that as well. And there's some places that have taxi regulations. We have them here, PUC. So it's not, you know, it's different everywhere else. And in New York, you got to buy a medallion. That's $100,000 a year or more for a medallion. But you make a lot. You make a lot of money in New York. So
one of the reasons that they're fighting Uber so hard, because you know Uber comes in, you don't have to do anything, and they're competing with cab drivers who have, you know, laid out a lot of money to get their medallion.
Oh, absolutely. I know. When it was Yellow Cab, it's now Z Trip. When Uber and Lyft first started here, they wanted to make sure the PUC put regulations on them because they were doing things that the cab companies aren't allowed to do. And
right.
you know, so William says.
But on the other hand, and I give them both credit, and I'm happy they seem to both be able to exist, because Uber also modernized an industry that sorely needed it.
Yes, absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
So
yeah, I
mean,
ways. I have nothing against Z Trip Cab, but right now they don't have their operators working here in Pittsburgh. They're in some operator exchange in Utah somewhere, or Alaska or whatever. You know, their telephone operators are not here. They're down to a few skeleton employees over there. I know some of the employees. I worked with them. I was a dispatcher for Yellow Cab as well. And, you know, there's like maybe 2-3 of them at a time, and that's it. You know, the orders come through a computer and they zap it out to the drivers. And then they have an app now. So you can go on the app and get a cab, and it goes straight to the cabs. It don't even go through Yellow Cabs. So, but I know they're operators. I've called them a few times when I've needed a Z Trip cab, and you know, they're in Utah, Georgia, wherever. I don't know wherever they come from. You know, so it's a different business now than it was when you and I drove. You know, and you know, technology has taken over a lot of different things. And you know, you have to do that. And Z Trip Cab, I try to get President Jamie Campolongo on here, but I have been unsuccessful. I wanted to talk to him about the current state of Z Trip and what's going on in the cab business and the fighting with these guys, Uber and Lyft and all that. But he hasn't returned my phone calls, so I don't know.
I wonder what his thoughts are on automation too, automated vehicles, if he sees that, or if that's kind of a pie in the sky kind of thing.
Yes. You know, it's not easy anymore. You know, Uber and Lyft have taken over most of everything. But during the pandemic, it was difficult to get Uber and Lyft. It was difficult to get a Z Trip. It was a tough. COVID was a tough time. You know, a lot of businesses went out of business because of you know, the regulations and everything. And now trying to get workers is hard. It's a tough thing, Joe. It really is. And Joe, I appreciate you being on the show today. Thank you for being on Ralph Williams One-on-One. This is my 4th show. And coming up, everybody, I'm working on getting Senator Sarah Honorado on here to talk about her run for county executive. And I'm working on getting El Vento Jr. to come on, talk about Franco's Italian Army. I'm working on a lot of guests to come on Ralph Williams One-on-One. Joe, thank you so much for being on. You have a nice day and have yourself a happy new year and a happy holidays.
Ralph, we'll keep listening. Thank you. Good to be with you. Talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. Have a great one. Thank you. All right. That was Joe DeStio. And he is a former radio announcer and newsman for ESPN Radio 1250, the old 1250 WTAE, KDKA. And now he works for the University of Pittsburgh, and he's retired, and he's having a great time. And I also want to get back to William again. Says thanks and appreciates the shows. I appreciate you watching, William. Hope you had a happy holidays and a happy new year. Taxi drivers it's interesting. The common person doesn't know what those industries are. Yeah, that is true. Okay, until you're in it, you really don't know what goes on in the industry. All right, I am Ralph Williams. This has been Ralph Williams One-on-One. Everybody have a great and safe, happy new year, and I'll see you next year for Ralph Williams One-on-One.